You're watching World Beater Wrestling. I am, of course, the World Beater, Damian Slater. And this is episode 100, the big one. So today's going to be all about my experience inside the 2016 WWE Cruiserweight Classic. Stick around. So when I was thinking about what to do for big milestone episode 100, I just kept coming to a blank. I couldn't think of anything unique or different to the norm of what I've already put out. And I was looking back through my YouTube messages and looking at some of the things people have requested, and the Cruiserweight Classic was a common theme. And it's definitely something I get asked all the time with podcasts and interviews. And to be honest, I'm to the point now where I'm tired of talking about it. But I guess when I reflected on it a little bit more, I thought that there's a lot to learn from that experience. And as short as it was on the surface, you're looking at 6 minutes of match time on television. There was a lot that led up to it, that happened during and also post, and I think there's a lot of lessons that are relevant to anyone in the pro wrestling industry. So there's like 1 million crickets just outside the door, which has never happened before, of course, and it's midday, which is even more ridiculous. So hopefully it doesn't affect the audio. I'm going to continue on. So the best place to start, I guess, would be what happened in the lead up. And I'm hoping you've seen my recent WWE tryout episode, which covered an 18-month period where I attended 2 tryouts in Melbourne and Columbus, Ohio. If you haven't checked it out and you're on YouTube, there's a little link which should appear up there. Give it a click, pause this video, come back to this one later, because that gives you a really good foundation of what was going through my head and what I'd been told prior to the Cruiserweight Classic. But moving on, post-Columbus tryout, I'd already been told there was an opportunity for me around about June, had no idea what it was. I just got told to save a certain number of dates. I was told to save dates in June, July, August, September, all the way up every month. But I was given the caveat that I may not be required for all of those dates, but June was a definite. So I saved the date, had no idea what to expect. There was nothing really online just yet. In my mind, I'm thinking it's a tough enough season or some kind of Australian WWE show, or who knows? No idea. Slowly news started to trickle that there might be a global cruiserweight series, I believe it was called, which, again, still no idea what it was, but that made a little bit more sense, especially considering that for the longest time I'd been told that it would be difficult for me as a slightly sub 6 foot Australian who is slightly sub 200 pounds to get anything substantial in the wrestling world. So in the lead up, I obviously wanted to be in the absolute best shape of my life, being that I was going to be on worldwide TV in, a once in a lifetime opportunity. And fortunately, having just come off these tryouts, I was in very good shape, probably the best of my career. I'd nailed my diet, I was being consistent with it, I'd got my head around exactly what I needed to do from that standpoint. The conditioning side was something that definitely needed a bit of improvement. I was training plenty in the ring, which, if you watch a lot of my episodes, that's the one thing I promote, is that if you want to get better at something, you have to do that exact thing. They call it sport-specific conditioning in a lot of places. But I thought, I can only train so often in the ring. I want to keep my body healthy. What can I do outside of that? So there were 2 things that came to mind. The first thing was the actual physical conditioning. There's a place very close to my old house in Adelaide called the Snake Pit, which is a set of extremely serious sand dunes that get extremely soft in especially the warmer months. And you're basically looking at incline and decline sprints in soft sand, very tough on the body, very tough on the lung capacity. And that's something that I did weekly or a couple times a week, just trying to slowly increase the amount of laps and speed that I did it at to build that conditioning. Now, was that going to help with pro wrestling? Maybe, maybe not. At that time, I didn't have much of an idea. I just knew that the Snake Pit was a place where a lot of football players went, a lot of elite athletes went, so I was going to do the same. The other thing I wanted to brush up on was my grappling. I thought that was a really good way that I might be able to stand out in the tournament. So, no better way to do that than by doing pure grappling. I contacted an old acquaintance of mine, Professor Nick Hughes. He's a black belt at Trinity MMA in Adelaide. He himself a massive pro wrestling fan, and I just said that I would like to learn a bit of technique that might have a crossover effect to pro wrestling. On top of that, I just want to brush up on the fundamentals. So I did some private sessions with Nick, And he was really good and really clever at giving me stuff that no one really used in pro wrestling. Unfortunately, I couldn't use any of it, or I didn't use any of it at the Cruiserweight Classic, and I probably haven't used enough of it since, but it kind of got me in the mindset of being a little bit unique and being a little bit different. So that was my training protocol in the lead up. I also learned that you can't have a passport that expires within 6 months of travel, which led to some extremely frantic and expensive renewing of passports. And I also learned the importance of social media, or more accurately, what not to do on social media. And you might be watching this and saying, no kidding, of course, you need to be professional and not controversial on social media. And I thought the exact same thing. Prior to this, I went through and cleaned up anything I thought may be controversial. And to be honest, I didn't have a lot, and I was pretty happy with how it looked afterwards. Just before the announcement of being in the Cruiserweight Classic, I received an email saying that you may want to look at this. And it was several pages of things that have appeared on my social media, things that I haven't even seen before, things that were from years prior when I was underage even, and things that not necessarily I had done, but more things that people had posted on my Facebook and on my MySpace. There's a reference for you oldies, which just shocked the hell out of me. And I had to go through, and again, I think it was 4 a.m, and I'm going through and deleting all these things on my account that I never thought might be a problem, or just didn't realize was still there. So for anyone who's looking to make it to the top, please make sure your social media is squeaky clean. I know that I've seen a lot of people, and I've spoken to a lot of people who I know who had opportunities thrown away because of their social media or things they've said in other mediums. So after all of these stressful experiences that in my head could have prematurely ended my relationship with the WWE, I was set to go. I felt good about everything. And then on June 14th, my birthday, I woke up to about 200 notifications, which I thought were all about my birthday and wishing me well, but actually they'd announced me for the Cruiserweight Classic. So I'd finally found out exactly what it was all about, the type of tournament it was going to be, and just such a cool feeling to see your head pictured with legends such as Brian Kendrick and Tajiri, people I've watched since a young age, and other people who I've known in the industry for such a long time and shared the road with, like TJ Perkins and Jason Lee. To see them also getting that same experience and opportunity was really, really awesome. So I was feeling good, feeling excited, nervous, every emotion under the sun. But most importantly, I felt ready to go. I arrived in very hot, humid Orlando, met up with some of the other wrestlers, went back to the hotel, became accustomed with everyone who was going to be in this tournament, and we had been told that we had a 4 to 5 day stretch of meeting at the Performance Centre to go through different training, from training for the match to media training to strength and conditioning training, to all the rest, everything that comes with something like this. So first day came, and the first thing we had to do was get a blood test, which traditionally I've had no issue with. And I don't know if it was a combination of dehydration and the humidity, but I thought it would be a really good idea to pass out in front of everyone. So drink your fluids, guys. So after that little hiccup, it was pretty much smooth sailing from there on out, and a pretty relaxed week when I think about it. We had things to do, but really it was a week where we could kind of forge our own path, pick the coach's brain if we wanted, we could train with the coaches if we wanted. And to be honest, you hear about people feeling like they're walking on eggshells and feeling like they don't want to rub people the wrong way and they don't want to step on toes and this and that. To be honest, I've never felt more supported and appreciated and respected in my time in wrestling. I was able to work out with Sean Hayes, who is the Performance Centre strength and conditioning coach, and he gave me so much insight into what it's like to be a professional elite athlete. Traditionally, I was more bodybuilding focused, hypertrophy focused, because really it's all I knew. And the only way to get jacked was to do the bro splits, hit every body part once a week. And having that week at the Performance Centre, it showed me how to strength train and how to train for speed and endurance and power and all these little other elements that often go neglected. We also did quite a bit of media work, getting interviewed for little segments that may or may not appear on the TV show. There's a separate warehouse next to the Performance Centre where they have a lot of production equipment set up, and it's where they tend to film a lot of their vignettes. So I got to do a lot of that as well, which was a really cool experience. I got to do some social media training, which certainly probably would have been helpful months prior, but you know, we got there in the end, and there's still a lot of lessons that I teach to this day. But you want to hear about the fun stuff, the wrestling. But you want to hear about the fun stuff, the sports entertainment. So I believe it was on the second day that we were brought in and lined up in what I can only describe as a murderer's row of incredible professional wrestlers. And that's where we were first told about who we'd be facing. Now, in the lead up to this whole tournament, obviously I had no idea who I was wrestling, how long I would be wrestling, if I would even be coming back. I'd been told that there was a chance I may come back for the second and third round. There's a possibility, but I also got told not to hold my breath because there are already a lot of Australians signed and, you know, 32 talented individuals. They can't sign everyone. Completely understandable. So in my mind, no idea what to expect from this journey. This, in my head, was one and done, and I was going to have to make the absolute most of it. So I'm thinking of ways to be unique and stand out. And this is one of the things that I promote absolutely every time I run a training session. It's the most important thing about wrestling is being memorable. So you've got to figure out ways that you fit in. You've got to figure out the gaps in the product. When you've got 32 incredible professional wrestlers that encompass every single style of professional wrestling, it's very, very difficult to stand out. Normally, I would be the technical wrestler, the grappler, someone who can do flashy transitions and unique offense and all the rest, but then you have wrestlers like TJ Perkins and Zack Sabre Jr. and underrated grapplers like Tyson Dukes and even Tajiri. Makes it very difficult for someone like myself. So even in those situations, I think it's really important that you are confident and you know exactly who your character is. Because your character is always going to be unique to you. It's always going to make you stand out. Then it doesn't matter if you only have one opportunity, if you have 2 minutes or 10 minutes, or if you have to wrestle a different style or a story that you're not comfortable with. The most important thing is that you tell your character's story within that moment. So these are my thought processes going through. I know who I am stylistically most of the time, but I am quite versatile and I know I can do a lot of different things. Character-wise, I was definitely more comfortable as a heel. At that point, for several years, I'd been a heel in most promotions that I'd been in. I thought it was a really good way that I could stand out amongst a pretty babyface heavy lineup. So I thought no matter what happens, whether I am able to show who I am or not, whether I'm able to wrestle my style or not, being a heel would really be a strong point for me. So back to the lineup, and my name is called as one of the first ones, and I wait for what seemed like an hour, which was probably only a second. And in my head, I'm thinking, please be TJ, please be Zach, please be TJ, please be Zach. Because I thought that my best in was to show my style against another grappler, because that would mean that I can show that I'm on their level, I can match them hold for hold, and stylistically it would make for a really entertaining match. And then they called out Tajiri, which absolutely blew me away. To have someone who I watched religiously from ECW to WWE and someone whose style I would try to mimic at times, and you know, one of my favorite wrestlers as a kid, absolutely. That was surreal. In that moment, I also felt, I guess, what you'd call a little bit of disappointment, because I felt like that would mean 10 seconds, buzzsaw kick, I'm going home, you'll never see me again. Which, to be honest, even if that was the case, that is still 10 seconds on worldwide TV. Fortunately, we were given 10 minutes curtain to curtain, which for anyone who understands professional wrestling, particularly on that level, that's unbelievable. That's 6 to 7 minutes of match time. And against someone like Tajiri, who obviously a lot of eyes would be on, making his return to the company, a former Cruiserweight Champion himself, can't ask for much more. Tajiri himself one of the most generous wrestlers I've ever wrestled. Wanted to make me shine, wanted to make me look incredible. And the one thing about pro wrestling is if you can make your opponent shine, you're going to shine just as bright. And that should always be your end goal within any given match. We all worked with agents, and I was lucky enough to work with Cesaro, who is someone I knew from many years prior when I wrestled him on the NWA Australian tour. So that was a really cool time to be able to have someone who I was familiar with, comfortable with, and that definitely took the nerves away. And they were just there to make sure things were kind of kept above board and that we were aware of what was asked of us. They told us flat out that they wanted us to be ourselves and they weren't going to restrict us in any way. Within reason, obviously, as long as we didn't step on too many toes with the things we did and we didn't double up on too many stories or moves or big moments, everything was going to be cool. Going back to what I said earlier about being unique and memorable and knowing your character inside out, even though I had backup plans for backup plans, the one thing that I probably didn't put enough energy into was thinking about what I would be as a babyface. In my mind, I was going to be a heel. It was a sure thing. It was a babyface heavy roster. And then when I was announced to be against Tajiri, someone who is coming out of such a large period of time off, someone who is a legend in the game, he was going to get the mega pop, and I was just going to be the foil to that pop. So, again, it didn't really cross my mind, and then I was asked to be a babyface, which, of course, I will do absolutely anything you ask of me. I look forward to the challenge. Still to this day, I certainly prefer the heel side of things. I can be comfortable being a babyface, but the fact that I would be in front of a new audience would make it potentially a little bit difficult. So back to the drawing board. I know that I'm going to be a babyface. I am obviously going to grapple because that's who I am, but it's not necessarily going to stand out amongst some of the other phenomenal grapplers on the card. So what can I do to stand out? And look, I knew that I was really good at selling. I was really good at making things look as believable and as legit as possible. And I'd spent a lot of time in the lead up years to this really honing my selling and trying to get a maximal response from the crowd in any given situation. So, that was my plan of attack. And against someone like Tajiri, whose kicks are some of the most devastating in the professional wrestling world, that certainly isn't very difficult. A couple of days out and the weigh-ins came, and like I had been pre-warned, these were going to be very, very legitimate weigh-ins, and if we couldn't stay under that 205-pound limit, there were going to be alternates who would replace us in the tournament. Fortunately, I have not been over 205 pounds for any substantial period, so I had nothing to worry about, but there were others in the tournament who only had about 3 or so weeks notice, who had to actually cut weight, diet down, and even sweat out some of that water weight in the hours leading up. So the formalities were now out of the way, and it was time to move on to the TV tapings. The day itself was very reminiscent of what I traditionally experience at top-level independent professional wrestling shows, and that's not at all a knock on the WWE. It was extremely professional, it was extremely well run, there were really no issues in terms of what we saw or what we felt. But just the fact that it was such a calm day, just a calm day where we ran through our rehearsals for entrances and things like that, but we knew what we had to do and we were all ready to go. We were just excited. And much like any independent professional wrestling show, as calm and relaxed as things may be for the several hours leading up, as soon as there's about an hour or two until go time, it's panic stations and things get a little bit hectic, a little bit frantic, and I felt the exact same thing. Very quickly, we were told to get into gear, and after we got dressed, we were rushed off to cut promos and to do backstage things and interviews and to have our music checked, and then it was 10 minutes until the opening ceremony, which I'd heard of, where we would all be paraded out. We would pose in the ring, and then off we went. And in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, cool, we do that, and then there's maybe like an hour or two until we go on. But that certainly was not the case. We came back from the opening ceremony, and the show began straight away. I found myself pretty close to halfway through the 16 match taping. So I was probably 6th or 7th in. From that moment until my entrance music hitting, it was just a complete blur of rushing around, nervous energy, adrenaline, and I wasn't nervous. I did feel quite calm in myself, and I'm someone who gets nervous wrestling for 10 people if I think there's a possibility that it may not go well. But in this moment, I felt like I was ready, I was prepared, I felt like I deserved it, and that's a really powerful thing. So the music hits, out I walk, Tajiri gets the mega deafening pop that I absolutely expected, and it was on. And then the bell rang and the crowd got very, very quiet, which, I'll be honest, did throw me a little bit, and that's just because I was backstage listening to the reaction of the first 6 or so matches, and it was monstrous. So in my mind, I was expecting the same, and it just wasn't happening. So the match itself, though, at the time, everything felt pretty good. I do remember getting extremely exhausted and probably the most gassed that I may have ever been. And it's something that for a long time I didn't understand, because I was in my peak physical shape, fitter than I've ever been, in better shape than I've ever been. And it was a short match. You're looking at 5 to 6 minutes. So there was no reason to explain why I should have been tired. But recently, I've been doing a bit of research into exactly why that may have been for a future episode about to come out on exhaustion and fatigue. And I think a lot of it came down to the adrenaline dump. I wasn't nervous per se, but I had a lot of excitement and a lot of energy. And the adrenaline dump can really take your breath away. In addition to that, my breathing probably wasn't there. You know, when you get excited, you start breathing a little bit more shallow, a little bit less. And in a 5 to 6 minute match, which doesn't sound like much, the pacing starts to pick up. You don't have that downtime to catch your breath. And it was a one-way ticket to Gas City. Another fact that stood out to me was the fact that we're working for a television audience. So even though there might be 400 to 600 people behind us, there's a hard camera that we have to show our emotion to and tell our story to. And again, that can be a little weird for an independent professional wrestler who traditionally works for a live audience. The referees also super on point with communication, which we don't normally get. On the independents, if a referee has a watch, that is a massive plus, but not always the case. And if they do have a watch, you may hear the time every now and then, but really it generally comes down to intuition and knowing how long you've gone in the match. In this situation, we were getting time called every 30 seconds. So we knew exactly where we were, and we knew that we had to hit that minute on the minute or as close to it as humanly possible. Coming backstage after that, even though I don't really have any regrets for the match itself, I definitely felt a lot of emptiness, and I definitely regret feeling that way. As professional wrestlers, we often rely on crowd feedback to tell us how we're doing. We can't see what we're looking like in the ring as it's happening. So when the crowd aren't quite responding the way that I wanted them to, in my mind, I'm feeling like maybe the wrestling's not connecting, maybe it's clunky, maybe it's not as smooth as I need it to be. And I was definitely down on myself. I felt like I'd potentially blown my one and only opportunity. And at one point, I must have been looking pretty down on myself because William Regal came over and gave me some really, really encouraging advice. He said that kicking yourself is just not the way to go. And he'd seen so many people in his lifetime who were so down on themselves after performances, and it just never ended well. There's nothing productive or positive that can come from just blatantly kicking yourself. Of course, taking on feedback and being constructive is a seriously positive thing, and it's something we all need to do to improve. But that is two completely different sides of the spectrum. And, you know, looking back, I feel a little bit embarrassed about that because, you know, I just lived my dream. And whether it came off the way I wanted or not, whether it was going to result in a contract or not, didn't matter because I'd done myself proud, and that's all you can ask for. The next morning, it was back home to Adelaide, the long trip back, and back to a relative sense of normality. And that's not to say that that would stay that way, because once the Cruiserweight Classic actually went to TV about a month later, then it started getting a little bit hectic, and there was a lot of media. There was a massive increase in bookings, and it gave me a lot of exposure, which would help me in so many different ways. There was even one time when I had to do a radio interview with a major national radio station, and they had to do it in the middle of the day. So while my students were out on lunch break, I'm on a phone call, and they assured me that it was going to go for a certain period of time, and it started to go way over. And I remember standing there and seeing the kids lining up at my door, basically banging on the door while I'm trying to get off this major radio station live call. Just surreal, just a crazy time. Wouldn't take any of it back, but just nuts. Obviously, we all know how it panned out, and unfortunately there were no more opportunities for me with World Wrestling Entertainment. I did have further tryouts and meetings and things like that, but it wasn't to be. But, you know, the experience taught me so much that would go on to help me massively, not just in pro wrestling, but in life. So that's that. Like I said, no real regrets. Of course, looking back with what I now know afterwards, there may be a couple things I would have changed. Maybe I would have put more emphasis on the character side of things. Maybe I would have kicked down that door a little bit harder afterwards, but everything is in hindsight. It is what it is. I'm super pumped with the fact that I had that opportunity in the first place. You know, to be the only Australian in such a unique opportunity that will hopefully be remembered forever, I can't ask for much more than that. You know, eventually I got to watch the match back, and I was actually super happy with the way it came across. As pro wrestlers, often we're very hard on ourselves in the moment. If we're not getting that feedback and that engagement from the crowd, it doesn't matter if the work is 5-star. It's not good enough for us. And then sometimes your work may not be very good at all, but the crowd's pumping and you feel a little bit better about what you're doing. And that's just the nature of the industry. But I think it is an important thing because, you know, when it comes down to it, crowd engagement is the absolute top priority, or should be the top priority for any professional wrestler. That's 100 episodes down. Maybe we'll make it 1,000 one day. Thanks again for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing, liking all the content. Stay on board. I got a lot of awesome stuff to come. This is only the beginning. Of course, as always, if you have any questions related to the Cruiserweight Classic that I didn't get to, or any requests for World Beater Wrestling, please drop it into the comments below. I'll see you next Thursday for the next episode.